She scrubbed hospital floors while the world walked past her, never noticing the tired woman in worn-out shoes. At night, she sat cross-legged on the living room floor, helping her kids with homework, her voice gentle, her eyes fierce with hope. There was no child support, no helping hand, just grit, grace, and an unshakable belief that her children were meant for more. Today, one wears a white coat and saves lives. The other walks into a courtroom, and the room rises for the judge. Maria never imagined she'd have to do it all alone. Life had other plans. One quiet evening, her husband left and never returned. No note, no explanation, just silence where a promise used to be. She was left standing in a cramped two-room apartment with two toddlers clinging to her legs and a heart racing with panic. Rent was due, groceries were low, and the only thing she had in abundance was responsibility. She didn't have time to cry. That luxury belonged to people who had someone else to lean on. For Maria, there was no fallback. The very next day, she picked up a mop and started working as a night cleaner in a city hospital. It wasn't glamorous. The pay was just enough to survive, but she kept showing up, 6 nights a week, sometimes 7. She'd leave before sunrise, walk home with aching feet, and still be there to cook breakfast and tie little shoelaces with trembling hands. She learned to stretch everything: rice, soap, hope. Second-hand clothes were ironed like uniforms. Broken. Furniture was patched together with glue, nails, and prayer. Birthdays meant homemade cake from boxed mix and candles reused from last year. Christmas gifts came from thrift stores or clearance bins. Her children never saw it as less. They only saw her trying. The neighborhood whispered. People assumed things. "Single mom," they'd say, with a tone that carried pity, sometimes judgment. But Maria never answered those looks. She didn't have time for gossip. Her days were built around tasks, bus schedules, school meetings, grocery runs with clipped coupons. Her nights were for wiping down hospital hallways while praying silently that her children wouldn't get sick, because she couldn't afford a doctor's visit. There were moments that hurt more than she let on, like when her son asked why his friend had a dad who brought him toys, or when her daughter came home in tears because kids laughed at her worn shoes. Maria would kneel beside them, look them in the eye, and tell them the truth. We don't have everything, but we have each other, and that's more than enough. She made the living room a classroom. The kitchen table became their library. She'd teach them what she remembered from school, filling in gaps with books borrowed from the public library. On tired nights, she'd fall asleep with the dishes undone and lesson plans scribbled on napkins. But somehow, she always managed to keep going. There were no shortcuts. No fairy godmothers. Just long days and longer nights. She missed PTA meetings when her shifts ran late. She never bought herself new clothes, but every sacrifice was deliberate. She wasn't just surviving. She was planting something deeper in her children. Self-worth, resilience, and the belief that their future was not tied to their circumstances. People saw a cleaner, but Maria was a builder. She was laying a foundation, one sacrifice at a time with no applause and no guarantees. No one outside her apartment truly saw the struggle. But within those walls, 2 children were being raised not just to succeed, but to rise. And they would. She made sure of it. Maria didn't have a college degree. She hadn't even finished high school. But what she lacked in formal education, she made up for in instinct, determination, and a fierce sense of purpose. Her children didn't just need food and shelter, they needed direction. They needed someone to believe in their future when everything around them screamed otherwise. So she became that compass. Even when her body was drained, even when the world dismissed her, she poured whatever energy she had left into their minds. She understood early on that the only way out was through learning. So she turned everyday moments into lessons. Walking to the store became math practice, adding prices, counting change. Waiting at the clinic became reading time. Words were everywhere, she told them, if you just knew how to look. She borrowed books from the library every week, picked out science magazines from donation bins, and made vocabulary lists from cereal boxes. What they couldn't afford in tuition, she tried to repay in imagination. Every evening, after folding laundry and packing lunch for the next day, she would sit on the floor with her son and daughter, one pencil, one notebook, and her voice guiding them. She would read aloud until her throat burned, stopping only to explain new words or ask them what they thought the story meant. Her methods weren't polished. Her grammar sometimes faltered, but what mattered was consistency. What mattered was love. She corrected their spelling with care, celebrated every correct answer like it was a medal, and never let them give up. When frustration crept in, when one of them said, "I can't," she would answer without hesitation, "Yes, you can. You're mine, and we don't quit." Over time, those words stuck. They began to believe her. They began to believe in themselves. There were days when exhaustion tried to break her resolve. Days when she came home to bills she couldn't pay and school letters she didn't understand. But still, every night she made time to sit with them, even if only for 10 minutes. That daily ritual became sacred. The world outside might be hard, but inside those walls, her children were reminded of their potential. They were told they mattered. She taught them kindness too, not just with words, but through example. When the neighbor's child came hungry, Maria shared what little she had. When an old man dropped his groceries on the stairs, she helped him carry the bags. Her children watched, quietly absorbing the lessons. Kindness wasn't weakness. It was strength, and it was the kind of strength that would shape who they became. As the years passed, she saw the seeds begin to grow. Her son started fixing broken radios just to understand how they worked. Her daughter began writing speeches in her journal, mimicking the judges she'd seen on TV. Maria didn't get ahead of herself. She didn't dream about titles or salaries. Her dream was simpler, that they would never feel stuck, never feel small, that they would know they were worthy of more. She had no roadmap, no perfect plan. But she gave them something far more powerful, the daily example of what it meant to keep going, what it meant to love without limits, to fight without bitterness, and to believe, even in the face of struggle. She didn't know it yet, but in those quiet lessons between paychecks, she wasn't just helping them read or write, she was writing the beginning of a new story, one where both her children would rise, and the world would take notice. Maria knew every choice had a cost, and in her case the cost was almost always invisible, felt in silence, paid in quiet, corners away from applause. While other mothers watched school plays and sports days from the front row, Maria missed every one of them. She was often scrubbing break room floors or sanitizing office desks while other parents clapped for their children. She told herself it was worth it, but the truth still stung. She wanted to be there. She just couldn't afford it. Her daughter once came home holding back tears, saying a classmate made fun of the way she dressed. The clothes were clean but clearly used, donated or picked from second-hand bins. That night, Maria stayed up stitching a ripped seam and adding buttons to an old sweater, trying to make it look new. She didn't cry. She didn't complain. She just kept sewing, slowly, carefully, as if each stitch might hold her child's confidence together. When her son began to struggle in school, falling behind in math, Maria noticed the change immediately. His posture, his silence, the papers folded deep inside his backpack. She could barely afford to pay rent, but she found a way to hire a local college student to tutor him once a week. She skipped meals to make it happen. Nobody knew. She didn't tell her children about the bills she delayed or the dinner she pretended she'd already eaten. They just knew the help had arrived, and that was enough. Maria didn't own a car. She walked miles to work when the buses stopped running. Her shoes wore out faster than she could replace them. In winter, her hands cracked from the cold because gloves were a luxury she chose not to buy. She layered old coats and pretended she liked the cold. What mattered most was that her children stayed warm, stayed fed, and stayed focused on their future, not hers. Even simple joys were sacrifices. She never bought herself a birthday gift, never splurged on a movie ticket, never said yes when she longed to say it. When her children asked for something extra, a toy, a class trip, a treat, they often heard, "Not this time." But she always followed it with something better. A hug, a story, a reminder that love wasn't measured in money. They didn't grow up resenting what they lacked. They grew up appreciating what they had. Sometimes loneliness crept in like a shadow. Holidays were the hardest. She'd decorate a small corner of the apartment, hang a few lights, cook the same simple meals, and smile through it all. No one knew how deeply she missed companionship, but she never let that longing distract her. Her mission was clear. Her time, her energy, her love. It all belonged to her children. That was the deal she made with herself the night her husband left. She would not let them fall. She would not let their story end in struggle. Others admired her strength from a distance, assuming she was used to hardship. But strength in Maria's case wasn't armor. It was scar tissue. It was pushing forward on empty, standing tall with a tired back and smiling through the silence. That often followed hardship. She didn't chase recognition. She chased results. Every sacrifice was deliberate, each one a brick laid on the path she was building for her children to walk on, toward something better, something brighter. And though no one saw the weight she carried, Maria kept moving, because her children were watching, and that alone made every sacrifice not only bearable, but sacred. It didn't happen all at once. There was no lightning bolt moment, no grand announcement. But slowly, quietly, the years of sacrifice began to bloom into something undeniable. It started with small victories, an award at school, a scholarship letter, a kind note from a teacher, praising their discipline and determination. Maria took it all in with humility, never assuming too much, always bracing herself for the next challenge. But deep down, she knew something was changing. Her daughter was the first to break through. She worked relentlessly, studying long into the night, sometimes whispering her notes to herself in the same small kitchen where Maria had once taught her how to read. She applied for law school with trembling hands, unsure if she even belonged in that world. When the acceptance letter arrived, Maria didn't scream or jump for joy. She simply held her daughter close, as if anchoring her to the moment, to everything they'd endured to reach it. Her son followed a different path, drawn to science and service. He had a quiet curiosity that grew into a purpose. He volunteered at clinics, asked endless questions, and shadowed doctors whenever he had the chance. The day he was accepted into medical school, he didn't speak. He just handed Maria the letter, watching her eyes fill with tears she tried to hide. It wasn't about pride. It was about confirmation that every sleepless night, every missed meal, every whispered bedtime lesson had not been in vain. Graduation day came like a sunrise after a long storm. Her daughter walked across the stage in a black robe, a judge, in the making, her chin high and steps steady. Maria sat far in the back, unnoticed by the crowd, wearing a dress she'd mended 3 times. Her hands, lined and tired, gripped each other tightly. No one there knew what it had taken to reach that moment. No one saw the nights spent choosing food over new shoes, the tears wiped away in silence, the books studied under dim light. Soon after, her son stood in a white coat ceremony, reciting the oath that marked the beginning of a new chapter in medicine. Cameras flashed, applause filled the room, and families stood with pride. Maria didn't say much that day. She simply placed her hand on his shoulder and nodded, the kind of nod that carried a lifetime of meaning. These weren't just achievements. They were acknowledgments, public signs of a private war that had finally turned in her favor. She never demanded recognition. There were no speeches about her, no headlines naming her sacrifices, but those coats, those degrees, those titles, they bore her fingerprints. Every courtroom her daughter would enter, every hospital room her son would step into would carry a part of Maria with them, not in name, but in spirit, in the quiet strength they both now possessed, in the way they treated others with dignity, in the way they never forgot where they came from. What changed that day wasn't just their titles or careers. It was the way the world began to see them. No longer just children of a single mother, no longer just kids from a forgotten street. They were now symbols of what persistence could become. And while the world clapped for the graduates, Maria stood still, softly smiling, finally letting herself breathe, because the fight was no longer just hers. They had picked up the torch, and they were running with it. Maria never asked for recognition. She never chased praise or public gratitude. Her dreams were simple: dignity, stability, and the chance for her children to rise beyond what she had endured. Now, with one child in a courtroom wearing the robe of a judge and the other walking hospital corridors in a white coat, the world speaks their titles with respect. Your Honor. Doctor. But what those titles don't show is the quiet legacy that shaped them. That legacy still lives in a modest apartment in the same neighborhood where it all began. Maria never left, even when her children offered to move her somewhere quieter, somewhere nicer. She politely refused. It wasn't pride, it was something deeper. The walls of her home still held the echoes of every struggle, every breakthrough. They reminded her where it all started, and why none of it came easy. She continues her days with the same routine she's followed for decades. Grocery store runs with a reusable bag. Early morning walks before the streets wake up. A quiet cup of tea as the sun rises. Strangers pass her on the sidewalk, unaware they are walking by the woman who raised a doctor and a judge. To them, she's just another older woman with kind eyes and calloused hands. And that's exactly how she wants it. But to those who know her story, Maria is more than a mother. She's a builder of futures. Her children never forgot the lessons she taught when no one else was watching. They carry them into every decision they make, every person they serve. Her daughter, now presiding over courtrooms, treats each case with fairness rooted in the empathy her mother once modeled. Her son, now treating patients, speaks with the calm reassurance of someone raised by a woman who cured fear with a single touch. Neither of them flaunts their success. They weren't raised that way. They serve with humility because they were shaped by sacrifice. They give back because they understand the power of one life lifted. Each year, they quietly sponsor scholarships at their former schools. No names attached. They fund free legal clinics, support free health screenings, and always return home for the holidays. No matter how busy their calendars get, they make time to sit at the same small kitchen table, now a bit worn, still holding their childhood drawings under its glass cover. Maria doesn't need to speak of her accomplishments. She sees them in every headline that mentions her children's names, in every thank you note they receive, in every life they change. She didn't raise them to pay her back. She raised them to pass it on. And they have. In every courtroom, in every hospital room, in every person they treat with dignity, Maria lives on. Her story isn't printed in textbooks. Her name isn't on any building. But her legacy is as solid as stone. It stands in every corner of justice her daughter defends. It breathes in every patient her son heals. Maria didn't just raise successful children, she raised good people. And in the quiet comfort of her small home, surrounded by memories and peace, she knows that was the greatest victory of all.